Hello class, today we're going to take notes on the synthesis essay. We're going to talk a lot about synthesizing sources and how to write a good synthesis essay over the next few weeks. Today and tomorrow are going to be note-taking days, which is why this is a pre-recorded lesson, because I know a lot of us have dodgy internet. So we'll do the notes today. Please take notes on a notebook or in a Google Doc, wherever you've been taking notes for the term. All of this information will be used, definitely, and just so you know, this is a type of essay that is on the AP test for those of you that are looking at taking it. So it's really important that you're actually taking notes. So that being said, pause the video. I'm going to move through this a little bit quicker. You pause the video where you need to so that you can write things down. So we're all drawn on the ideas of others as we develop our own positions, regardless of the topic. Anytime you're starting to learn about something or you're beginning to develop an informed opinion, you're at least curious about what other people think, right? Think about, like, you see something on the news or in the newspaper and you might have an opinion on it, but you might be curious as to what other people think. Whether you are explaining your opinion about an issue specific to your community, or you are developing a position on a national or global issue, you should know as much as possible about the topic. This is essentially what synthesizing is. Think of a research paper. We are literally putting the pieces together in order to have a more informed opinion. Rather than making a quick response that reflects an opinion based on what you already know, you might research and read sources. And you guys are old enough that you should be researching and reading sources. Then you can develop an informed opinion, a measured response that considers multiple perspectives and possibilities. This whole process is called synthesis. So the concept of, like, you have this idea, you have this belief, and then you go and you read what other people are saying about this topic, and you develop an informed opinion. There's a difference between an opinion and an informed opinion. You can have an opinion on something that you're not informed about, but that doesn't make it necessarily a good opinion, because if you don't know everything about that issue, or at least a good chunk about the issue, then you're not making an informed decision, and your opinion might not make sense if you know about the rest of the situation. So what is synthesis? Anytime you take two or more ideas or concepts and combine them using your own ingenuity to create something new, you have synthesized those elements. Think about when you make a milkshake, right? You might put some bananas in there, some yogurt, maybe some granola, and then you blend it all up, and that is the synthesis. But for your essay, or that's the smoothie. For your essay, you might take data, you might take, your thesis, you might take more text, and that is the synthesis essay. For example, your favorite outfit is a leather motorcycle jacket over a floral dress. You might describe your fashion as a synthesis of classic and edgy. You're combining these two elements. When you're writing a synthesis, you're combining multiple sources, which is what the essay on the AP test is. They give you multiple sources, and you have to combine them to form your own opinion. Anytime you approach a concept with several possibilities or perspectives in mind, analyze each one, reflect on them, and arrive at a new way of seeing, or not entirely new, then more informed, that is synthesis. So anytime you are taking existing information and putting it and using it to create your own, if not new, more informed argument on something, or opinion on something. In order to enter a conversation, you must first carefully read and understand the perspectives and ideas surrounding an issue. Examine your own ideas on the matter and then synthesize these views into a more informed position than the one you began with. You have to consider all the information that is out there. Same with the essay. You can't blindly look at one side of the story. You need to look at every part of the story in order to write a good essay. When you learn about a subject, look for reliable sources. Be aware of the bias that that source brings to the topic. We talked a lot about bias in term 1. Bias is when somebody is already leaning towards one side over the other. They prefer one side over the other. We want to be very aware of the bias when you're using different sources, because if a text is biased and you've chosen to use it to support your claim, then that's something that could actually make your argument weaker, right? But if you acknowledge the bias, be like, hey, I know that this is slightly biased, but it's really good in this sense, then readers are more likely to buy into what you're saying. Consider the speaker when talking about bias. What does he or she believe in? How might the speaker's position provide personal gain? If the speaker of the text that you're reading, the source that you're reading, has a personal investment in the thing that they're talking about. For example, we've used the Coca-Cola company in the past, right? If a doctor is working for the Coca-Cola company, but he's saying, hey, Coca-Cola does not, the sugar in Coca-Cola does not cause obesity, you should be weary of that because that doctor is being paid by Coca-Cola, So be aware of who the person is working for or writing for and why. What incentives they might gain from that. So approaching sources. Always, always, always approach sources with an open mind. Be willing to walk into a source and not judge it from the start, right? Even if you are like, oh, I know this is pro the other side, still read it and analyze it. Read critically. Ask questions. Look for flaws in logic. Assess the evidence. Even in the texts that support your opinion, you should be critically analyzing them. Why should we critically analyze the things that go for us? Well, maybe you're missing something. If you just click on an article and when you do your own research and you're like, oh yeah, this supports my opinion, you could be missing a big bias in that article that will then downplay the rest of your essay. So think critically, ask questions. This is where being an active reader really comes into place. We worked a lot on annotating and really marking the text as we read. You need to do this with every source that you come across. Marking your sources is the first step to being able to truly dissect and make connections between different sources. Using sources to inform an argument. Sources should always enhance, not replace your argument. A lot of this is going to sound familiar from when we were doing rhetorical analysis because it is very similar. The only difference is instead of using one text to write your argument, you're combining multiple texts, right? Anytime you're using a source, it should help better your argument. It should not stand in place of your argument. What do I mean by this? If you're giving a piece of evidence, okay, I want to know that this evidence is helping you build your argument. You're not just listing the evidence from that source and moving on. We talked about warrants, that connection between your evidence and your thesis. This is where warrants become extremely important. They're really important in rhetorical analysis essays as well. But when you have 5 different sources or 10 different sources or 30 different sources, it's really important that you're making connections between all of these and you can show that you understand how each of these speak to the other, and in that you've thought all the way through these. More importantly, it's crucial that your argument is what's running the show, not just listing evidence, listing evidence, listing evidence. What you have to say is the main event. Your position is central. It's all about you. There's no difference in this sense from rhetorical analysis, but it becomes so much easier in a synthesis essay to have the focus be on the sources because there's so many of them. So I just want to remind you that the focus is your argument, not the sources. Sources are an enhancement. Using sources to appeal to an audience. The type of evidence and the way it's documented depends on audience and situation. Your goal in a synthesis essay is the same as that of professional writers, to use sources to support and illustrate your own ideas and to establish your credibility as a reasonable and informed writer. You are using sources to support your ideas and establish your credibility. They are your ethos. Okay? This is how you establish credibility, because you are not a professional in these fields, but instead you are the one gathering the information and then presenting it in a concise manner, kind of like a journalist would, right? What's important here with using sources is you have to give credit where credit is due. Okay? Give credit where credit is due. If you use a source and you have an idea that is not your own, you have to cite it. If you don't cite it in a works cited page, it's plagiarism. If you're writing a synthesis essay in class, I don't require you to have a works cited page, but you do have to have in-text citations. And tomorrow we'll talk more about what that looks like in your own writing. Writing a synthesis essay. As you move from reading and analyzing the sources to integrating them into your own writing, you will engage in a process of selection. Ideally, you explore the individual texts and start to see the connections among them. You might look at 15 different sources when writing a paper, but only 10 of them, or even 7 of them, are useful, right? So you need to very strategically pick what you're going to say within your synthesis essay, because if you don't, you can be left with sources that don't do the most for your argument that they could. When we talk about seeing connections, we're talking about what texts speak to another text. What do I mean by this? Well, I mean what parts of one person's research or argument relate to what another person is saying. When we look at the specific synthesis prompt tomorrow, you'll see more what I'm talking about, but I like to say, like, what texts speak to one another. When we're writing a paragraph about, the pros of using this device, whatever device it is, I'm going to combine information from multiple sources that talks about the device in the same paragraph to make my argument seem more well-rounded. Like, I've critically analyzed all of these sources and I've made the appropriate connections. Not just, in this paragraph I'm talking about source A, in this paragraph I'm talking about source B, etc. Okay? So that ends part 1 of the notes. Stay tuned for part 2, which will be coming in another video.